So I'm sitting on the front porch of our foreman-provided dairy farmhouse. And off in the distance, I could hear the cows belching. I'd also get the whiffs of the smell of manure. Fortunately, behind me was a wooden screen door where I could smell my mother's fidel stew and smell the roasted green chilies. Off in the stone throw distance, I could see my dad filing a hoe for tomorrow's day in the field. He was using an electrical saw or electrical file, and I could see the sparks flying in circular motion. The next day, about 11:30, 12 o'clock, I'm standing between two cotton field rows, 95 to 100 degree temperature, holding that hoe that my father was filing the day before. I was 7 years old, working at $1.25 an hour for 10 hours a day during the summers of my youth. I was wearing a long sleeve cotton shirt, and ironically, we were working towards producing that next long sleeve cotton shirt. We were working what we call la limpia, or chopping cotton, as they call it on the West Texas Caprock. Now, with regards to that long sleeve cotton shirt, we would wear it because we would partly protect from the sun, but also from these beetles, we call them carralejas, that were somewhat native to Texas, and they could create these blisters on your skin. And I think in hindsight, some of those blisters were also created by heat. At 4:30 in the mornings, I was woken up by my mother's flour tortillas. Oh, that smell was so good. And anyway, she would be making noise in the kitchen, rolling that dough. And I knew it was time that we were going to be going out to the field soon. She would wake us up at 5 in the morning, but I'd try to get every second of sleep until that hour. But then she would shuttle us over to what I remember was a Pontiac Catalina, and she'd sit us in the back seat, my older brother Carlos and my older sister Guadalupe, where we would use each other's shoulders as pillows for the ride out to the field. Now, at noontime, we couldn't wait till then because that was our first opportunity to spend time in the shade and enjoy the delicious food that my mother had made, and at the same time reminisce about the day. Now, I was just 7 years old, and I would make up these games, or my brother and I would make up these games. One of the games was called Chapulín Wars. And what we would do is we'd take the flat end of the hoe, and we'd have these green grasshoppers that were pretty big and thick, and we'd kill them with that flat end. Essentially, we'd tally how many we'd killed and see who won, who killed the most in that day. Sometimes, on occasion, we'd hit the daily double, which was we'd kill two while they were mating. I remember still my personal record was 108 chapulinas in one day. Now, some of these memories aren't that fond, but one of them is we worked for a man named Redman. He was a foreman, and he would drive by the side of of our field, park about 30 yards behind us, and then walk over behind us and kick the dirt, insinuating that we hadn't chopped the weeds that we should have chopped. I could see the dirt flying up in the air, and I could see his fiery red face. What seemed to be about 10 minutes, which was really less than a minute, he would stop, turn back around, and traverse over to his pickup truck and drive off. I don't know if he was doing that to motivate us, but he certainly intimidated us. Now, 7 years later, I'm now promoted, and I am now taking grown men to the field. I was 14 years old, and my mother had said, I'm weary and tired, and, I think you can do it now. And I was charged with preparing their hose for the day, preparing their water, of course, being the transportation and picking them up at 5 in the morning and driving them to the field, driving them back and making sure this happened on a daily during that summer while I was 14. A few years later, 3 years later, I'm on another field, this time on a tractor. And I just graduated from high school. And I'm wondering, what am I going to do? I'm not sure what my plans are. I'm thinking about the Air Force and just not clear on my plans. And about noontime, my brother calls me. He's at university, and he asked me the same question, kind of, what are you going to do, bro? And I'm telling him I'm thinking about the Air Force. The only thing that I had only heard about it in advertisements. I hadn't been speaking to a recruiter or anything. In fact, I'd never been really counseled in high school. I didn't go to the best school, I can tell you that, but I graduated top 10% of my class and never got any counseling. In fact, my brother and I were both in the Honor Roll Society, and I know that his senior year, he was elected president. And he told me that right after that the principal had told him, you're not going to amount to much, which indirectly he was telling me the same thing. We had other challenges. I remember sitting in Miss Chandler's class and her telling my friend and I, Catarino, that we couldn't speak Spanish in class, not in her class, she said. Little did she know that I was going to leverage that skill later on in advancing my career. My father, may he rest in peace, also created a bit of an obstacle for me in that he told me in my junior year, son, why don't you quit school and start helping out the family, just like your cousin has? And I told him, Dad, you watch. One day I'm going to wear a tie to work. And he goes, sí, como no. Yeah, right. Back to the tractor story and my brother calling me at noon. He's saying, bro, he said, the Air Force is fine, but think about it this way. If you go to the university and you can try it for a year, and if you don't like it, you can always bounce back to the Air Force. But the other way, with the Air Force, you're committed. I said, yeah, right, bro, but I don't know if I can afford it. He goes, bro, I work for the financial aid office, and I can help you apply and get you access to resources that you'd be eligible for. So 6 months later, I'm raising my right hand and swearing upon the Constitution and becoming a naturalized U.S. citizen. I'm now sharing an apartment with my brother, just like we did a room when we were at the farmhouse, this time at university. Little did he know that he would be studying, he was studying science, and that I was studying business, and little did we know that we were both going to be in the same field together. Except this time, it wasn't going to be under the hot Texas sun in the cotton fields. This time, it was going to be in the biotech pharmaceutical field. Thank you.
It's a regular morning in 2018. I finished my neurology residency and my MS fellowship. Now I'm part of the faculty at UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas. I'm going up the stairs from the 9th to the 11th floor. And I'm thinking to myself, Wanda, you're so out of shape. You need to start working out. I opened the door, the back door of the MS clinic, and I see Paula waving at me. As every morning, I said, hola, Paula, buenos dias. And she talks back to me and she says, hey, Wanda, how are you? Then she says, your first patient called to reschedule. I said, okay, look at my schedule, it's up to date. If he needs a sooner appointment, I can certainly bring him sooner. Then her face got really sad. And she looks at me, he said, well, he doesn't want to reschedule with you. He said he did not want to see you because your last name is Spanish. He said he wanted to see Elliot instead. It was interesting. Everybody wants to see Elliot. He's a world-renowned MS specialist. And I'm used to that, but I was never told that a patient did not want to see me because my last name wasn't Spanish. That really threw me back. I said, Paula, just call Elliot and see what he thinks. She called Elliot, and a few minutes later, he came back through to the clinic. He's very upset, and he asked Paula, so what's going on, Paula? And she says, well, Wanda's first patient called to reschedule. He doesn't want to see her because her last name is in Spanish, and he's requesting to see you. Elliot said, if he doesn't want to see Wanda, he will not see anyone in this clinic. Call him back and let him know. Paula did, and the patient never came to the clinic. It was an interesting situation. I still remember Elliot's words. Nobody ever stood up for me like that. But I was never in a situation like that. I grew up in Puerto Rico, born and raised. I live, it's a small island in the Caribbean, part of the United States. My parents got divorced when I was 3 years old. My mother moved to the north of the island with me and my twin sister so they can help her taking care of us. We were poor. We lived in a 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom, 7 people. My grandparents, my mom, my twin, my aunt, her daughter, and me. Plus a dog. We always had a dog. And it was one of those situations in which we were happy. We didn't have much, and there were a lot of rules in the house, but we had what we needed. There were times that we only have white rice and ketchup, but in my mind, that was the same for everybody. We were poor, and we didn't know that we were poor until probably I was in college. The neighborhood was really bad. So my grandma will never allow us to go out and play with the kids, even though we went to the same school with the kids. We were always inside the house, and my mom was very strict. You have to study. You have to get the better grades. Always, always, always. There were times when it was 6, 7 p.m., we closed the doors, and we will not get out of the house. Because at that time is when you start seeing all the prostitutes walking down and up the streets. You will see the drug addicts and the alcoholics. And my mom never wanted us to see in that part of the neighborhood we grew up. It was even shameful to say that you were growing in that area. As a young kid, I always remember we were 6 or 7 years old, and my grandma was talking with a friend, and this friend turned to me and my sister and said, "Hey, where do you live?" I think she was trying to figure out if we knew our address. But we say, "Oh, we live in La Puntilla." And my grandma looked at us with this face, you know, the face that, wait until you get to the house. I'm going to throw the chancleta at you. Those of you that has Hispanics mom or Latinas moms may know what la chancleta is, which is basically a flip-flop. And when my grandma was really upset, she will just throw it at us, and whoever got it will get the hitting, right? At that moment then, my grandma says to her friend, "Now, we live in Barrio Rosario, Sector La Puntilla." For her, it was very important that we know that even though we live in that neighborhood, that was not part of where we are. And imagine that now, in 2020, that neighborhood doesn't exist anymore. The callejones were destroyed, and the house where I grew up is still there, but it's completely empty. We were able to finish college. I did pharmacy school. My twin sister did accounting, and I worked for 5 years, but I always wanted to be a doctor. So I went back to med school. Of note, my grandfather was not happy about it. He believes that pharmacists and everyone in his generation, pharmacists are more respected than doctors. But even without his total blessing, I went into med school. I finished med school, and then I decided to move to the mainland to do my residency in neurology. I moved to the University of, I did it in the University of Connecticut. And while I was there, that first winter was devastating, I'll tell you. Coming from an island with sun and heat, always hot, seeing the ocean every day, to come to this cold winter that looks really great. I got seasonal affective disorder, major depressive disorder. I was out 3 months of my residency, but I was able to overcome that. And then I went to Dallas to do my fellowship in multiple sclerosis. Now it's 2010. I have another new patient coming in to see me. She comes to the office with her husband. He's very quiet. He doesn't say anything. He looks at everything I do, but very reserved. And I'm thinking to myself, poor guy, he probably doesn't want to be here. She just forced him to come into the clinic. Let's be honest, no guys want to be in their wives' appointments, medical appointments. So she was shy at the beginning, but as I talked with her, she opened up. And we were able to go over her clinical history. I did her full neurological exam. I reviewed the MRI with her and her husband. I told her what the differential diagnosis was, what my thought was, that she very likely has MS, but I needed to rule out other conditions. At the end, I gave her an order for do some more labs and to do another MRI. And I said, I want to see you back in a month. I stand up, I shake their hands, and as we're walking out to the checkout desk, she turned to me and said, thank you so much, Dr. Castro. I was about to cancel this meeting. I thought that I couldn't understand a word that you said in English, but I'm so happy I didn't do it. This is the best doctor's appointment I ever had. Her husband smiled, agreeing with her, and they shake my hand. And this gave me a flashback to 2 years earlier with that other patient that did not want to see me because my last name was in Spanish. She's given me a compliment, or at least she thinks she's given me a compliment, but it really didn't feel like a compliment to me. It was a question why. Why she will think that because my last name is Castro, she will not understand me. Why people make assumptions based on your last name, your accent, or the color of your skin. Anyway, I think I was able to change her mind, and hopefully she will never think about someone this way again, and she will give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Unfortunately, the other patient never gave me the chance to show him that I could have been the best doctor he will ever have.
It was June 11th, 2010, when I decided to move to from Puerto Rico to North Carolina. I got to this place named Angel, countryside of North Carolina. And so I decided to make the library my home office. So in that place, I met. It was two ladies that always, greet me at the library. But it was this particular lady, Joanne. She got those red cheeks, blonde hair, curly, with the bang, and a lot of spray. Like, I mean, she can shake that head and that hair wouldn't move. And she was very sweet. She was my emotional support, because it was hard for me, being the first time away from my family permanently. And then also she provided me a lot of resources, and she helped me to find jobs near the area, or the area that I was looking to eventually relocate. So, days passed by, and one day I got this interview offer. So I went to a Goodwill store, and I did the interview, and I got the job, and as a cashier and sorting clothes. And I remember going back to the library celebrating. I got my first job. Yeah, we're gonna, this is gonna open doors. One door open and more doors will open behind that. So I was very excited. Some people told me, oh, you're gonna work at the Goodwill. And I said, you know what? It's a job and I'm gonna take it. So I started working there, and immediately I felt like I was like kind of home, because it was a lot of Hispanic people that will go to the stores. And in that store also I met this Puerto Rican lady, Norma, tall lady, well put, red lipstick, and she used to go every Saturday to a beauty salon next to the Goodwill store that it was owned by a Puerto Rican lady also. And after she got her hair done, she will jump into the store just to browse around, maybe trying to find a treasure there. So we met, we talked for a few weeks, and one day she came into the store and she told me, there's some openings at Biogen and I want to refer you. And she told me, to be honest with you, I was kind of hesitant to refer you because I really don't know you, but you know what, God guide me here, and it's with a reason, and he doesn't do any miracles at half. So this is the link. I went home, I applied for the job, and I waited, and I finally got the first interview. It was a phone interview. So I called Norma. I'm very excited. I share with my ladies at the library, and they kind of helped me prepare for that first interview. I was scared a little bit because my English wasn't that good at that time. Not that it's perfect now, but it's better. And so I did that first interview, and then I had to wait to see if they called me. During that period of time, I was very happy that I got that first interview, but at the same time, I was very anxious to see if I could make the cut to get a second interview. So a week passed by, I get the second interview, and it's when I really got very concerned and nervous because it was a group interview, which I don't have at that moment the experience on the pharmaceutical industry. And so everything was new for me, and being in front of many people that maybe know the industry and knew what they were doing, and I was being naive to all this. It was heartbreaking for me too, because I didn't want to fail. This was the big opportunity. This was the dream job that I was looking for. So I went to the interview. Everybody was sitting around this big table, and everybody was very quiet. So as everybody knows, I love to talk. So to calm myself, this other lady, Elise, that was on the other side of the table, I felt her that she was very tense, and I said, you know what, everything is going to be fine. Like, I had control of all my emotions, no, but I was telling them, yeah, everything is going to be okay. So we start talking to each other, and everybody kind of break the ice. We did the group interview, and then we had a talk with the supervisor. That time was Leslie, and she told us, she told me that if I was going to get selected for another round, that the probability for me to get the job was more. So the people that didn't go to the second round of that it was the third round, but actually it was the second round in person, they would not be selected. So going back home, it was a lot of stress. It was the waiting was consuming me, but I still have my job at the Goodwill, so I just tried to make myself every day, stay put, go into the library when I had the time, prepare myself. I talked to Norma. Norma gave me some help to prepare me for the interview. And finally, that call came. I called Norma. I called the librarian. I went to that other interview, and God was working that miracle, because it was John Cavari who was the person that interviewed me, and he was a pastor or a priest. He doesn't work in Biogen anymore, but he was the sweetest person. Everything went very smooth. And after that, after that, I got another interview on the phone with Eileen Foley. It was a Spanish interview. And then it was the time to wait, and finally I got that call. I got the job. I couldn't move after that call. I I was very proud of myself because I did that. At the same time, it was a lot of emotions because I said, this is the reality that I'm going to stay in the United States. And this is the reality that I'm going to be far away from my family for the long run. So, with that, I took the phone, I called my family, I called my daughters, I called my mom. We celebrated. Everybody was very happy. I called Norma. We cried on the phone. We laughed on the phone. We screamed, celebrated. And then that day when I went back after working at the Goodwill my shift, I went down to the library and I thanked the ladies there, mostly Joanne, because I was very appreciative of all they did for me, not just helping me to prepare for an interview and to find a job, because they were the people that were there for me when I needed the most, and the rest is history.
So I'm in this hair salon with my tia when the hair salon owner comes up to us, kisses us both on the cheek, and asks my aunt who I am and where I'm coming from. And in that moment, I start to freeze up, and I start to become uncomfortable because I know that DNA is going to launch into my entire life story right then and there, starting from the day that I was born, because she claims she has a leading role into that. You see, my mother, who had been getting prenatal care at one of the best hospitals in the city, had been sent 70 blocks back to my father's apartment because they claimed I wasn't ready to be born yet. TNA thought the hospital was crazy, so she's decided to start yelling at my dad to take my mom to the nearest hospital because she was clearly in labor. And my dad looked over to my mother and said, "Could you please translate that for me? Your sister spoke a little too fast for me to understand." So as you can tell, my parents are both from different worlds. My dad was born and raised in New York City, where his mother's family were Ashkenazi Jewish who came over from Austria and Poland. And his father's family had come from Louisville, Kentucky, where they were hailing from Britain and Scotland. My mother, on the other hand, she was born and raised in Caracas, Venezuela. And her own family, it was a mixture of Spanish, Italian, African, and indigenous roots. And she had come to the US about a year before. They had met in New Year's Eve, where they fell in love. And despite the fact that my mother spoke very little English, and my dad had to have his high school Spanish dictionary handy, they knew they wanted to be together. So my mother decided to sell everything to come to the US, where she was the only one in her family to emigrate, which is why I spent a lot of my years of my childhood going back and forth between New York City and Venezuela. From the week after school ended to the day before school started, I hopped on a plane by myself for 5 hours, clapping my way down into Caracas International Airport, where my tias, tios, and primos would be there waiting eagerly for me. You see, I was considered the gringa in the family, even though across the board, my cousins and I could be considered a human Benetton ad. Some of them were a lot more light-skinned, like Carlito, like me, and some of them were darker skinned, like my cousin Rockman or Cachita. But despite our differences, at the end of the day, we all seem to have one thing in common. We all seem to develop the same sinus issues. The Vargas nose tends to be predominant in our family, despite our genetics. Anyways, I would spend a lot of time visiting all parts of the city and the country, from visiting my abuelo regularly in El Valle, where he would make me arepas and plátanos, where I would sneak off with my cousins to catch late night cachapas or perros sucios, which are Venezuelan hot dogs, to hiking up on the mountainside in El Avila, where there would be a small town at the top of the mountain that you could explore. And they would have freshly made fruit juices from which you could drink from. Sometimes I would go to Maturin down east, where I would visit Las Cuevas, or the caves, where there would be these guacheros, or oil birds, that we could watch and explore. And I would repeatedly slip and fall because no one bothered to tell me the right shoes I had to wear to go inside a dark cave. And other times I went up north to El Coro, and I would visit the sand dunes, or Las Medanas, where people would pull their cars over and take off their shoes just to experience the sand beneath their feet. Other times I would go off the coast to Margarita Island, which is very well named considering it's a vacation spot. And we would explore the beaches, have pina coladas, and I would visit different water parks. And there was, at one point, there was a comedian amusement park called Musipan, which was built to poke fun at the quirks of Venezuelan slang and culture. This all changed in 2008 when the economic, political, and social conflicts in Venezuela had really started to go downhill. Despite the media portrayal in the United States, it was due to government corruption, financial recklessness, and increasing crime that my mother and I have been unable to go back, which tears me apart because the following year, my abuelo passed away, and I'm no longer able to say bendición, and he would hug me really hard, and I would hug him back way too hard. He would say, "Concha le vale," because I would hug him way too hard. I would never be able to go to the hair salon with my tia, where after our hair was all nicely done, we would put in little pinzas in our hair and put over a plastic bag to protect our newly done hair in the rain and the humidity. Most of my relatives I haven't been able to see because after the passing of my abuelo, we were driven apart politically, and soon we were driven apart geographically. Tio Shul, who has 2 master's degrees and was one of the leading managers at a popular beer company in Venezuela, was forced to take a sanitation job in Florida, where he worked very long hours until his physical health forced him to change jobs. My cousin Carlito, who has a medical degree, has been unable to get his licensing papers in Argentina, so he works at a clinic treating COVID patients unpaid. The rest of my family, who has been able to leave and had the means to leave, have been spread across in Ireland, Spain, and Costa Rica. And a lot of my family has been unable to to leave the country. So my mother and I regularly send money and whatever we can to Venezuela, despite the challenges in which to send aid there. These stories of immigration are not due to those of, are not the stories of those who are leaving the country to find better opportunities. It's because of the fact that Venezuela, a once rich and well-educated country, became a place where there was no jobs, food was scarce, and crime had become rampant. And so my family was forced to leave to find another life in another country. We all hope to go back one day, but at the end of the day, even though we know Venezuela will rebuild, and this is because Venezuelans are super resilient and able to find humor and joy in even the darkest of times. We know that Venezuela will never be the same again. So the Venezuela that we know and love will forever be a memory en la mente y en el corazón. Thank you so much for listening to my story.
Lunchtime is my favorite part of the day. I go down to the cafeteria with my friends and coworkers. The food is free, provided by the company Johnson & Johnson, and it's always Mexican food, of course, because we're in Mexico. We stand in line, engineers, operators. It doesn't matter. With the tray in our hands, we're all the same, just people waiting to be served. Everyone is happy and talking. Somebody says something funny, and I have to stop eating because I'm laughing so hard. They ask me, "Is it true that you went to MIT?" "Yes." "Well, was it hard?" "Yeah, it was pretty hard." "And what are you doing here in Ciudad Juarez?" "I was born in Juarez, Mexico. My parents brought me to the US when I was little because it would provide me with better opportunities. I did well in school. I learned English. I like science and math. And when I turned 17, I was admitted to MIT. I didn't know where it was. I didn't know about Boston or Cambridge. That first semester, I failed chemistry. I had never failed anything in my life. I went to one of those benches that line the Charles River and sat down, wanting to be alone and feeling sorry for myself. People deal with adversity in different ways, and my way was to look for love. So I went on the internet, and that's where I found her. 2 years later, we were married. My parents said this was not a good idea because I still had not graduated. But try telling that to a young person in love. I am so lucky to have found her. Through her support and encouragement, even in those nights that I couldn't sleep, I was able to graduate. Afterwards, we wanted to start a family, but living so far away from family and parents would be difficult at best. So we rented a U-Haul, packed our stuff, and we towed our crappy blue Ford Tempo across the US. 3 days later, we were back, but I didn't have a job. So this time I went on mechanicalengineering.com, and that's where I found a headhunter. I thought Johnson & Johnson only made baby powder. Turns out they also manufacture medical devices. So I was hired, and we started a family. And I wish I could say that's the end of the story. 8 years later, the conversation at the lunch table is changing. We're hearing news reports of an increase of violence across the city. dead bodies are being found, some days 3, some days 10 or more. At night, we hear gunshots, and people have to hide in their closets or under the bed and wait for it to be over. My wife works at a local TV station, and she sees the raw, unedited footage of the decapitations and other gruesome scenes that are too graphic to even show on the 5 o'clock news. We've become political analysts now. Some say that it is a turf war between the Juarez and the Sinaloa drug trade organizations, as they're called. Some say it's a shift in the Mexican administration policies. The truth is, nobody knows. Nobody knows when it started, why it started, or if it'll ever end. It wasn't always like this. My grandma used to send us to the corner store when I was little. Me and my brother would go and get the Coca-Cola, and we would walk there without any fear, without worries. The company has hired ex-FBI agents to give us training and advice on what to do. They say that there's been an increase in kidnappings and people being held for ransom. They say that we're being watched. We should try to be unpredictable. We should never take the same roads. We should not arrive and leave work at the same time every day. Always look in your rearview mirror to see if you're being followed. And if you do suspect you're being followed, do not call the police. They're probably in on it. If you're caught in the middle of a gunfight, get down as low to the ground as possible. That's your best chance of survival. At home, my wife and I sit at the kitchen table and discuss options. Some of my friends are leaving the city and some are leaving Mexico altogether. But where would we go and where would I work? In the morning, I'm driving to work and the cars in front of me began to stop. Only moments earlier, there had been another gun battle and the cars are still blocking the road with the dead bodies inside. It's becoming difficult to get to work, but as a manufacturing engineer responsible for keeping the production lines running, working from home is not an option. The conversation at the kitchen table is now more serious. It's wintertime and it's dark by the time I get home. The kids are still in school, so now would not be a good time to move them. But if we do decide to leave, we shouldn't wait much longer. At work, the conversations are very somber. I was just informed that a friend of mine, an engineer, has been killed. It was a case of mistaken identity, they say. He was driving a black pickup truck, and it was the same make and model as the one that the bad guys were looking for. I'm glad I drive a white Prius. Now it's a race against time. I'm sending out my resume, and I need to find a job before the start of the new school year, and I have to stay safe in the meantime. In 2010, I was hired by a company in Boston. I moved my family here, and we're safe. Last year, I returned to Mexico to visit relatives and attend my niece's quinceañera. On the way back, driving down a desert road, again, the cars start to slow down. We move over to the left lane, and as we pass, I see 3 men face down on the pavement. The news the next day reported 3 men gunned down on their way back from Chihuahua. I still think about my friends that remain in Mexico, the ones that don't have the option of immigrating, and the ones that have lost their lives. I'm one of the fortunate ones, but not because of my dedication and hard work. I think that perseverance is only half the story. The other half is just plain luck.